I'm determined to find a new song for that.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I wonder if we could change that theme song.
I get a new timer and a new song. But anyway, that's just us. Welcome to the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That's Robert Hilliard. I'm Whitnie Wiley, and we are here with you on Thursdays, 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we are going to be talking about work life. You can call it balance if you want. You can call it unbalanced, integration, harmony. People call it lots of different things. But we're going to be talking about this from the perspective of what it is that you are doing that is creating that, and how you can take some actions to change it, starting with your mindset, the mental models that you have, and the assumptions that you're making about what is and what isn't, or what needs to happen or doesn't need to happen, and about boundaries and how the establishment of boundaries can help you with this thing that we're calling work-life balance, and how maybe your ego is playing a little bit into that. So, Robert, you want to give some opening thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is a great topic because it's something that a lot of people have questions about. Some people struggle with this, and I call it work-life imbalance. Right? because I believe that some of these things that people struggle with are unintended consequences of swooping in and doing the job that other people can do. Because and it's not, and we'll get to the ego part, but sometimes it's because they truly care a lot about these folks, but they don't understand that that alleviates the problem in the moment. The person feels great because you came in and you helped them. But on the back end, the unintended consequence over time, they start to feel like they should go to you for everything. And so that creates more workload on you. And because that is the unspoken rule that you have in place, it just becomes a vicious cycle. And the other part of that, people have kind of romanticized this notion of coming home and being so exhausted. I worked so hard today. I got so much done that I have no energy to even turn the doorknob to get into my home. So that's, I'll start with that, and then we'll kind of fold in all the other aspects that you and I like to talk about.
It's interesting that you said that, because it's a phenomenon. I don't know that. Well, it's obviously not exclusive to women. I think it manifests differently for women than it does for men. Most of my clients are women. They're females. Many of them are attorneys, not all of them. Some are aspiring to higher levels in their companies. They're in-house counsel, and they're aspiring to levels in their companies. Others are moving out of law into running their own businesses of different types. And I have some entrepreneurs that don't have anything to do with law whatsoever. And a recurring theme, and as you mentioned it, is this doing the work of others intentionally or unintentionally, to be helpful, often to just get it done, right? So sometimes there's a need to learn how to delegate. Sometimes it's just about, it's quicker to get it done than it is to delegate. And for leaders, that's not an effective use of your time. It's not an effective use of your energy. And I would say across the board, whether you're in leadership or not, the same thing applies. But it's something that happens a lot with women and mothers who are used to having things done a particular way. right? And so you've done these these acts for your children, and as they get older, instead of turning over things to them, delegating chores and things to them that they could do, you continue to hold on to those things because other people, in sometimes the fathers, the husbands, or other people in your family are not going to do them the same way that you do them. And because you want it done a particular way, you continue to do the thing, right? And then you bring that same behavior over into your work, where instead of, and we talked about this last week, about letting people learn lessons, right? Giving people the space to learn. And when we take that away and we hold on to it for whether it's easier, whether we don't know how to delegate, whether, and you said we'll talk about ego, or whether it's ego, holding on to doing more than is yours to do creates this need to not only do that, but to do your work. And then when do you do it? If you can't do it during the workday, then you're doing it outside of the workday. You're taking work home. And then you find yourself looking up weeks, months, years later, burnt out and feeling, not having had a proper vacation, and wondering why you feel the way that you feel. You're tired, right? I have a client that every time I talk with her, she's like, I'm just tired.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're tired because you won't take time. And you don't take time, and we can get into this, and maybe we'll have some audience members who will weigh in on this. You are tired because you haven't set boundaries with yourself first, right? And then with others around you. Sometimes it's because you have, and this goes to the mental model piece, you've got a thought in your head: if I don't do a particular thing, if I don't do all the things, it's going to have a negative repercussion on me, on my career, on my progression. Therefore, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue to do all these things. And then you feel put upon, right? And you don't really have the energy and the ability. First of all, you can't do everything. You just can't do everything. And to have this false notion that if you just keep doing what you're doing and piling more and more on, that it's going to get better down the road. I'm here to say it's not, because now you've created an expectation that this is how you do things. This is how you get work done. And if you change it, then people will say, well, you used to do all of this and now you're slacking off. And you're not slacking off at all. It's just in comparison to what it had been. Now you've got this seeming slacking off. And so, I am working with not only that client, but other clients, helping them to find that place where you are giving the best that you have to give to your work, but you've got to save something. I don't say save some for yourself. You got to start with yourself first, right? You take care of yourself and then you give the best to your work, not the other way around, because as you mentioned, there's nothing left at the end of the day. You don't have anything left for you. You don't have anything left for your family. And you're not serving the people in your organization by taking on more than is yours to take on. I talked a long time. I didn't mean to talk.
No, that's okay. No, I can tell you're very passionate about this. No, and it makes sense. Listen, when we talk about this, one of the things that I like to ask, when you and I talk about it, or when I talk about with clients, why are you doing what you're doing? And that's where the ego comes in. And what you were talking about, people that think that if they don't do it, it's not going to get done right. what you're talking about they're pace setters. Those are those folks that are experts at their job, and they have a certain standard. That standard is very high, and since they feel that no one else can achieve that standard, they go ahead and step in and do that. That's the ego piece. So, and again, that has an unintended consequence, but it's done for a different reason. It's done because you feel that you're the only one that can do it. And what ends up happening is you create this, again, it's an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
It's a vicious cycle. People are afraid to do the job now because your standards are so high. And it could be that, and not in all cases, when they don't do it well, the employees don't do it well, they get reprimanded. And so they have this kind of paralysis where they don't want to do things that are outside of their comfort zone, and it creates this vicious cycle. On the other hand, not taking the time to educate your employees is another thing, because you should be setting them up so that they can do those tasks and later move those things off your plate when you need to delegate those. So that's the ego portion of it. It's the pace setting aspect of it, where that manager who is an expert, their standards are so high, they don't believe that anyone can compare. And no one has the chance to, because they don't really allow them to make the mistakes that will help them get better.
I have a client who has a boss who is the top of the organization, who is doing the work of just about every direct report that she has, because of just what you said. More than that, because it's not even that she's done the jobs of these other people, hasn't done the job, doesn't know the job, but I want to caution, and I want to caution you to look at what Robert said. Why are you doing what you're doing, right? To actually stop and take a step back and say, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Whatever it is, like, take the time over the course of a week or two, take inventory of all the things that you're doing. And then ask yourself, why are you doing the particular things that you're doing? Your job as a leader, ordinarily, and the higher up you go in the organization, your job is to be a strategic thinker and strategic doer. Your job is not to be down in the weeds doing the tactical day-to-day work of your employees. And if you look at how you're spending your time, and you find that you're spending your time doing tasks that are not yours, you've got to step back and ask the question why. Get really curious about why you're doing what you're doing. And this is some of the hard work that happens when you're working with a coach, or if you've got other issues, maybe you're working with some other professional, but you've got to get to the core of why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then once you figure out why you're doing what you're doing, identifying the things that you're doing that are not yours to actually do, if you will start putting those things back where they belong, you can start to reclaim some of what is creating for you imbalance or burnout or feeling overworked and overwhelmed. If you start there, right, is just a good place to start, to get really curious about what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing it, and addressing that, and then letting go of those things that are not yours.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And what you're saying, are creating some internal boundaries. And I believe that goes with the other part of that, which is creating external boundaries. And that was the third thing that I wanted to talk about: having blurry or just no boundaries at all, not really setting the expectation to your very capable staff that they should be able to handle certain things, and leave you the time to handle those strategic things. And that happens a lot. Like some people they just don't feel comfortable having that conversation and letting their staff know, because they want to have an open door policy, which is great. But there are some times when you as a leader need that alone time, when you need to focus, you need to work on things and have that uninterrupted time so you can have your best, your best self, and use all of that, your energy for that particular task in the moment. And then set some time aside where you go out and you can interact and help your staff and people that
Right.
work on your team.
And so, going back to that last example and sort of this concept of ego, if you find yourself ever saying that you can't take time because your staff, I can't take a vacation because they need me, right? That's something that needs exploration. If
Absolutely.
you find yourself doing other people's jobs, the technical aspects of other people's jobs, you need to take the time and work through that. I would suggest hiring a coach. Whether it's Robert or Whitney is up to you, but a coach nonetheless, someone who can help you to identify and work through that, because ultimately you're not serving yourself and you're not serving your staff by behaving that way or working in that way, and you are not giving yourself the best opportunity for your own growth, right? Not only is your staff not growing, but you're not growing. You're not growing as a leader, and you are not growing as someone who can enjoy other aspects of your life.
Yeah, and those things lead to some side effects, and you and I always talk about this. And one of the first side effect that I talk, because it's the one that comes up all the time, is burnout. You're constantly doing this. At some point, it's going to catch up to you. You're going to burn out. You're not going to have energy. You can be exhausted. You may even end up in the hospital. I'll get to that one later because that does happen. The second thing is, I call it perpetual priority juggling, where you have no free time. You always have the balls up in the air. You never can set them down to take some time for yourself and to, as they say, sit back and smell the roses, spend quality time with your family. And because you have this priority juggling all the time, where there's no set parameters, you're distracted. When you're with your family, you're thinking about the job. When you're on the job, you're thinking about your family, and no one's really getting 100% of you at any given moment. So you want to make sure that you're setting aside some time to take care of the priorities that you absolutely need to take care of. Delegate those things that other people can handle, letting your people stretch outside their comfort zone, teach them some things, train them, coach them. And the last thing I wanted to point out is, and I mentioned this before, illness. This can create physical illness in your body. If you're constantly putting your body under stress, the human body, humans are amazing. We're resilient, but once we break down, it's hard to recover. We can take a lot, but after a while, we start to collapse. So you need to take that time to replenish yourself, to make sure that you're giving yourself that mental, physical, spiritual space that you need so that you can recharge.
It's a good point about stress. A lot of people think that they perform well under stress, and that may be the case for short periods of time, short bursts. And there are certainly times in your work, there are times in your life where you're going to be doing more than you ordinarily would. It just happens. There are seasons, right? But just as the seasons, if you pay attention to the 4 seasons and the way that it works, there's a rhythm to life, right? There's a rhythm to each day. There's a night and a day, light and dark, for a reason. If you notice that the rest of nature is operating flowing with what's going on, it is humans who are doing other things, distracting and acting in ways that are out of concert with the natural flow of life. And I get it. We've set up a culture. Business is 24/7, 365. And so there's something always going on. But if you look at the rest of nature, that's not how it works.
Yeah, but
Right?
there are ebbs and flows. And and you said something that's really important. Stress can be very helpful to get things done. That's how that's how you listen. That's when you're lifting weights, you push yourself. When you're running, you push yourself, but you cannot maintain that level of exertion because then something breaks.
Right.
So you have to have appropriate amounts of stress at appropriate times. There's nothing wrong with doing that if you're purposely doing it to stretch yourself out of your comfort zone, to learn something new, to pick up a new capability. That can be extremely helpful. It's when you're doing it, when you're going 100 miles per hour all the time without any break. That's when, listen, if you step, your car, you may have I know you like cars. If you have a performance vehicle that can go really fast, yes, you can keep that pedal down. But if you put your foot down on that pedal all the way, something's going to break.
Right. That's a good analogy, right? That's a really good analogy. Let's say we have two cars that are have the same capability in terms of capacity for fuel, right? They both have, let's say, 20 gallon gas tanks. You've got one that's a super high performance car and one that's sort of your ordinary run of the mill car, right? And you're in the car, or even if you have the same car and you chose to put your pedal to the metal and go 100, 120 miles an hour, you're not going to go as fast at 120 miles an hour with the same tank of gas that you would at 60 miles an hour. Right? Because you are using the fuel and you're using more fuel more quickly that way. So if you think it's just super simple analogy or an example, if you just think about it that way, your fuel will last longer if you slow down. And we were in Hawaii a couple of years ago. I was there speaking of running, I was there for a race. And in the days before the race started, they're just vacationing. My mother, husband, and I went to the other side of the island. We went over to Hilo's side of the island, and from Kona, and we're on our way back. And you have that decision: do we stop for gas now, or do we get gas somewhere? Can I get gas somewhere else? And I made the decision. I'm driving. I made the decision. Oh, we'll wait till we get over to the other side. At some point,
those stories never end well.
So to get to the other side of the island is like all uphill, and then you go downhill. And we're driving, and we're in a rental car, so it's not a car that I know. I'm just going by what the numbers say of the car, right? And it gets to a point where we have further to go than the car says there is gas to get there. And so fortunately we get like almost to the summit of going over Mauna Kea or whatever it is, this mountain range. And I start driving slower and slower to get
serve that gas.
And then when we get to the top, I'm like, we're just going to coast. We're basically going to coast down because I have no idea if we're going to be able to make it. Fortunately, we had enough gas to get there. But that's exactly the point. Your reserves, what you've got available to you in terms of energy, right? It's limited. It's limited. And you can only go so fast, so long. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And all the analogies and quotes that are out there. You've got to put on your own oxygen mask before you take care of other people, right? So put your health, your what you need in front of the job and those that you're serving, so that you will actually have something to give. Otherwise, if you put that first, as Robert mentioned, you get to the point where if you don't slow down, you'll find yourself forced to do so, whether it's by illness or some other mechanism. You won't be able to sustain what you're trying to do forever. And it could be maybe you don't physically end up ill, but your relationships suffer. There are all kinds of ways that this can manifest itself. And so take care of yourself first so that you can take care of others. And the way that you can do that, again, is start by looking at what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing it, get some clarity about what it is that you actually want in your life. Do you want to go home? I mean, maybe you have to ask the question, do you want to go home in a work day and have some downtime, to have dinner with your family, to be fully present when you're there having meals with your family? Is that what you want? And maybe it isn't what you want. And so then you've got some other questions that you've got to ask. But get clear about what it is you want, and then ask the questions on how what you're doing is moving you towards that or away from that. And if it's moving it away from what it is that you want, then you've got some other decisions to make. And starting with boundaries, first with yourself, and then enforcing them with other people becomes extremely important in order to keep things like perpetual priority juggling and others from keeping you from getting where you're going.
You know, it's so funny when you were telling that story. I was, I'm like the mad scientist between the two of us. I was like, I would love to have some kind of leads put on you and watch your stress level every time you put that pedal down to see what effect that was having on you. But that's the thing, right? You made a decision, and then you have that. It must have been incredibly stressful. Every time you had to give that car a little gas, you're probably like, oh my goodness. So it's one of those things, those like unintended consequences. And so you just led us perfectly into remedies, like what you can do. And the first thing is establish boundaries, inner and outer boundaries, boundaries for yourself. Know why you're doing it. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing this truly because no one else can do it? And if no one else can do it, why can't they? Did you set that up? Maybe it was unintentional, but now no one else can do it. And they always come to you to get it done. And as a result, you're burnt out. You have to constantly step in and do the job that someone else is perfectly capable of doing. So ask yourself that question, set those boundaries, and know that some people don't like boundaries. This reminded me, I forgot about this story. And when you were talking earlier, it came back to me. Years ago, I was working as a supervisor in an organization. And I never mentioned the organizations because all the organizations I worked with were great. But they all had issues like every other organization.
All do. All are great, and all have issues.
Absolutely. And I had a coworker that was stepping up, becoming a supervisor. And one of the things that they did was when they became a supervisor, they were always giving the managers, going and getting them coffee, buying them coffee every day. And I said, don't do that. Don't do that, because I know these folks. I've worked with these folks. I've been a supervisor for a while. The minute you stop doing that, they're gonna see it as a problem. I said, if you're getting it for yourself, you can ask, but don't make it a habit of just buying it for them. And sure enough, a couple of months went by. This person was late for work. They didn't get all the managers' coffee. They got called into the office, and they were like, "You seem to have an attitude today." And the person came to me, they were really upset, and I was like, I'm sorry you're going through this. But if always ask if you're going to get it for yourself. You can ask, but don't make it a habit of doing it for them, and that's happened. So the unintended consequence was when there was an unintentional boundary put on, the situation because they were late. Those folks didn't like it. So no, some people will not like the boundary, but if you're able to work with them and have conversations with them, they will understand why you have that boundary and that you'll be able to help them as well. And the other thing, and we talked about this earlier, and I want to circle back to it. Know how much ego, or if any ego is involved in your decision making. Really check yourself. Egos aren't bad. When we talk about ego, people go, "Oh my God, my ego." We all have egos. There's nothing wrong with egos. Egos are not bad. They're part of our psychology and our psyche. However, if you're doing everything to pad your ego, to stroke your ego because you feel insecure, that's a problem. So ask yourself the question, why am I doing this? Am I feeling inadequate and I have to continue to do these things to feel like I have value? Or am I doing it because I feel that other people are inadequate? So ask yourself those questions, check your ego, and make sure you're making the best decision that's going to benefit you and your team and allow balance on all sides.
I think that's a really good point. What I heard in there is that without boundaries, you can create expectations, or that people can create expectations of you, so that when you come to a place where you decide to set boundaries or enforce some boundaries, it can create problems where other people are, because they have this expectation that this is who you are, this is how you work, this is what I can get from you, and now you're telling me I no longer can. And they're saying that doesn't work for me for whatever their reasons are.
Listen, they not buying their own cup of coffee probably saved them time and a little money. They were like, look, I'm not. I have a colleague that's going to bring it, and hey, wait a minute, I could have gotten coffee, but yeah, set those boundaries.
So the other part of the setting boundaries is, why are you not setting boundaries, right? What are, if anything, are you afraid of? What are you imagining will happen if you set boundaries, or if you take back ownership of your life and your work? What are you afraid that is going to happen? And I just want to briefly say some of that keeps you from establishing those boundaries is probably made up in your head. Some of it could be true, but you're never going to know until you do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I often hear, well, people will be upset. And I'm like, well, what are you trying to upset them? What are your intentions? Are you doing it to help them learn and grow? Okay, then tell them the benefits of you setting those boundaries and delegating that work to them, or whatever the subject happens to be. But what are your intentions? And the other thing is, a lot of time, that's their just limiting belief. There's nothing behind it. It's just a thought that they have. Or it could be an assumption because it happened before in the past, but sometimes there's nothing behind it at all.
And the point of that is that it doesn't, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter what the consequences are. You have to come to a place where you decide that you're going to weigh the pros and cons, and whether or not that's work, the calculus, right? You have to do the calculus and make a decision on whether or not that works for you. And so you and I, as we were preparing to have this conversation, we talked about whether or not something works for you or something serves you, right? And I want to talk a little bit about that, because you used the term that, whether or not that served you earlier in our conversation. And I want to suggest, I'm going to posit that there's a difference in something working for you and something serving you. And working for you is, I would say, more event-based or situational, where something works for you in this moment, right? This decision works for me right now. I can change my mind. But something that serves you, and this could be a distinction without a difference for some of you, and others' words matter. But serving you, at least in the context that I use it, is to look at the full scope of what it is you're trying to achieve, where it is you're trying to go, what your goals are, what taking into account your ultimately your vision, your values and your priorities, how that weighs into that, and then whether what you're doing serves the bigger purpose, right? Does it serve the bigger purpose? And if it doesn't do that, you've got a lot of decisions to make. Because if it's not serving you, basically in the long run, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? And it could be, and here's the really challenging thing, about being an adult, is that you've got tough decisions to make particularly when it comes to your work. And if the work that you're doing is not serving you overall, not just the paycheck for right now. And this is not to say that you need to leave your work or, walk away from something right now. It may mean that there's a plan that needs to be put into place to move you to something that ultimately serves you in the bigger scheme of things. Because I would say your job is working for you right now, but it's not serving you overall, right? Sort of the two things. And if it's not serving you overall, you've got to stop and think about how you can make some changes where you are, or do you make some changes to be somewhere else, to do something else, so that the work that you're doing actually does serve you? Because if you are feeling chronically stressed, not just stressed today because you had a difficult day or you've got a huge deadline on the horizon, but if you are chronically stressed and you're feeling the way you're feeling all the time, never have enough time to get anything done, you don't have time for lunch, to take a break, to walk around the block, to take vacations. I've got a client who hasn't been on vacation in years.
Oh, well, yeah.
Years.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're working through this process of how to get to a place where she can act, and she's actually going to be taking some time over the next couple of weeks. And so, but getting to a place where you can physically, mentally, emotionally separate yourself, create those boundaries. In order to do that, it takes you asking these questions about what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing it, what is the end game? What is your end game? And if the end game isn't in alignment, you're going to have all this, the extra stress and the angst that goes along with what you're doing. You're not enjoying your job. You're not enjoying your life. You're not enjoying your relationships, but you keep doing it because the money's good, or I'll never get this title, or, you've got to stop and think about that.
Or you just may be stuck because you don't have the time to do any reflection, right?
Or that.
But
that's a choice too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've certainly been in that space earlier in my career where I didn't have any time to do reflection. I was so busy just in the daily grind of things. And finally, when I got that reflection, I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm not happy, And so you have to create that space. And sometimes it takes, a bonk on the head, or it takes a setback.
And that's what we would like to avoid, is the bonk on the head, right? If you will make the time ahead of time, proactively, then you can avoid that. And I had the same thing before I left my last job. I was asking myself, why are you here? Why are you so, dare say I was miserable. I mean, there was a point of time in which I was really miserable doing what I was doing. And I had to ask the very questions that we're saying that you have to ask. And it's like, what are you doing? How is this either working for you or serving you? It was doing neither at various points. And making a decision, it was a hard decision. And at the same time, an easy decision, right? The hard decision were some of the things that I know that our audience struggles with, right? It's a paycheck. I got paid really well. I did some prestigious work. I've had a great time, all of that. I get it. But in the grand scheme of life, it wasn't working for me and it wasn't serving me. And so taking the time to actually ask the questions. And I will say this again, if you don't make the time, somehow the time will
get made.
The time will get made.
It's one of those things. It's just how the universe works. At some point, if you can't keep your foot all the way down in that pedal. At some point, the mechanism is going to fail, and you'll have to do some reassessment. My thing is, if you don't understand, or if you don't know, or if you don't have that, some people just don't self-reflect, and that's not a, how should I say this? That's not a criticism. Some people just don't do it. It's
just a fact. Yeah.
They don't have the skill. They've never had to do it for whatever reason. But I will say this, if you have a hard time doing it, if Sunday night is the worst night for you, then you should put some pen to paper. And I didn't create that. I had a boss that mentioned that, said, if Sunday evening, around bedtime is really stressful for you, then you have some reflection to do. That means that you're probably stuck or you're unhappy. You need to really reassess where you're at in your career or in your life and kind of figure it out. And that can go for anything. If it's New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve or whenever your family comes over, you probably have some reflection to do. You look at those events that create stress for you. It can help you kind of figure out what's happening in your life and why those things are happening.
That is a good point. And so as we wrap up, I want to say this. A client that has had some problems with time and these boundaries, we had a simple exercise. And maybe this is something that can help you. If you find yourself working after work every evening, you find yourself spending your weekends working, just carve out. You don't have to jump from 0 to 60 in 2.2 seconds, right? This is not, a Tesla, test drive. Baby steps. And I want to suggest baby steps. If you are not in a position to hire someone to work with to help you through this, just try this. Carve out a small chunk of time, an hour. If you can't get an hour, half an hour. And as Robert said, pen to paper, asking yourself a few questions. Go to a park, go to the library, go sit in your car out in the driveway, wherever you need, get some quiet space and some time away from other people. Just ask the questions and then just listen for the answers and write down whatever comes to you. And I can guarantee you, if you'll just start there, asking questions about why you're doing what you're doing, what it is that you want, how is what you're doing not serving you? Just ask whatever questions come to mind and the answers that flow from those questions. Write them down. You'll start to get some clarity. And once you get clarity, it's easier to take some steps. So that's what I would like to leave you with, sort of as a practical, what can you do next? Robert, final thoughts.
Find one small place to place one small boundary. It doesn't have to be, it could be at home, could be at the job, just one small thing. Baby steps, like you say, Whitney, they're so important. And it's placing boundaries is a habit. A lot of times people they don't have that habit. They're so used to being the go-to person. They're so used to saying yes, but find that one place, that small place where you can put that boundary on, and see where that takes you, and see how much time that frees up for you.
Absolutely. You know what boundaries has done for me? I'm done.
Yeah.
When we're finished here, I'm done working for the day.
That's it.
That's boundaries. And every day of my work looks different, but I set out intentionally to have boundaries around my work and how I move from work to home to, and I work at home, right?
Mhm.
So it's pervasive. It's where I am all the time, but it's a choice. And if you want to live the life that's, you've got a vision of a life, in order to live that, you've got to make choices, and starting with boundaries is a really good one. So
Yeah.
with that, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We are here every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. We thank you for being here. If there's anything Robert or I can do to assist you, whether it's with boundaries, career management issues, transitions, whatever, executive coaching, please reach out to us and let us know. We would be happy to be of assistance to you. And if you've got any topics that you would like for us to cover, let us know, and we will be sure to include them in a future episode. So again, thank you for joining us. And until next time, take care.